this Apache chopper assault began, or at least we began reporting on it about this time last night, just south of Baghdad. We now have a view of some of what went on. CNN's Carl Penhall was the embedded correspondent with the 11th Attack Helicopter Regiment of the Army's 5th Corps, and he's filed now on that attack.
What I can tell you is that the other Apache helicopters that flew alongside that came under heavy anti-aircraft fire as they flew a mission to attack Republican Guard positions around the town of Karbala. The aim of the mission was to destroy some T-72 tank emplacements, up to 90 T-72 tanks in that region, and some heavy artillery pieces. But as the helicopters flew into the target area, they came under heavy anti-aircraft fire, both from military emplacements and also, commanders say, from residential areas, in an effort not to target civilians or cause possible civilian death. Then many of the helicopters didn't unleash their Hellfire missiles for fear of destroying homes and the like. On return to the airfield where these Apache helicopters are now, the pilots throughout the day today have been assessing the damage that they received to their craft. Not one of them has escaped without a bullet impact. Most of them have anything between 10 and 20 bullet impacts. One even had an engine blown off by a rocket-propelled grenade.
Carl Penhall, who is with that group, and we expect we'll be hearing more from him as we go along. General Wesley Clark is here with us, as always, and we can tell we just showed General a shot of that helicopter sitting in a field, and we can tell our viewers now that that helicopter is no longer sitting in that field, has been blown to bits because...
Well, we're not going to allow that technology to fall into the hands of the Iraqis or whoever's back there working with the Iraqis here.
Is that something that they send in, and how do they do that? Are there munitions on the helicopter that...
No, we would have sent in an airplane to just put a guided weapon right on the top of the helicopter.
How do you read this incident in the context of the overall plan? Because it, again, we tend to focus a lot on those specific things that we are witness to and can report, and it doesn't necessarily provide the broad picture. The significance of it is good and bad. What?
Well, two things here. First, the reports we've been hearing have only talked about what happened to the Apaches. Nobody's reporting what happened to the Medina division.
Right.
In fact, I've received information from, indirectly from Army sources, that the Apache raid was effective. We destroyed a number of tanks, we destroyed a number of artillery pieces, killed a lot of Iraqi troops out there. That's been followed up today with more airstrikes. This is part of the process of breaking down and destroying the Medina division. Now, these Apache helicopters are built to take fire. And we knew when we designed them back 20-some-odd years ago that they were going to be in a tough ground environment. That's the reason why they came back with all those holes and an engine missing. So the pilots, they expect to do that. That's not to say that we won't do things differently the next time. We'd rather not have any fire at all. But as part of it, this is part of the campaign. It's a give and take thing, and it's basically on track.
One more question on this before we move on. To any extent, do you think that our ability to report these things in the way that we are now able to report them through the embedding process places undue emphasis on any one incident, this one in this case, at the expense of the broader picture?
Well, no, it's very hard to, when you get the information here, you're not receiving all the information that the Army has available. And even then, we don't know everything inside the Army. The soldiers there, leaders, don't know everything that's happened to the enemy. So you always know your own losses better than the enemy's losses. Right. You know your own movement better than the enemy's movement. So you tend to go from exhilaration that we had with Walter Rogers the other night when we were dashing across the desert to despair when suddenly you take losses, you have people captured and so forth. When in reality, neither of these is tactically significant. What's is no more than a tactical significance. What's strategically significant is the force has moved up to close with the Iraqi Guard. It's consolidating its positions. It's preparing while the Air Force is continuing to grind away on Iraqi command and control.
It's just a good thing to keep in mind that it seems to me that There is a large picture, and we'll deal a lot with the large picture tonight, but along the way we also deal with these snapshots, and we ought not get, all of us who are learning about this and in our case reporting on it, ought not get confused about it. It's about 6:10 in the morning in Baghdad now on a Tuesday morning. Quiet there now. There has been some activity, some explosions heard last night, Baghdad time last night. And you heard in the update some reporting that the airport, Saddam Hussein airport, has been under attack. I think it is generally believed that the coalition would rather not destroy that airport completely because they would only then have to go in and build it, but obviously they have decided to do some damage to it or around to it, and we keep our eye on Baghdad as we go. The other major storyline tonight is, again, as it was last night, the story of prisoners of war. 2 more Americans taken prisoner of war today, 2 helicopter pilots. Technically, one would have been the weapons operator sitting in the front seat and the pilot sitting in the back seat, though both are certainly capable of flying and both have controls to fly if they had to. Those are the young men. Ronald Young, his family lives outside of Atlanta here, and CNN's Susan Candiotti has talked with them. She talked with the family earlier. I guess I just said that, Susan, so I now repeated myself for the first time tonight. Susan, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. In fact, the family, as you can well imagine, has been glued around the television set all day long and all evening long, looking at everything they can possibly learn about their son, who they have now learned is a prisoner of war. Joining me now is Ronald Young's father, Ronald Young, also joining us. And one of the things we saw just a moment ago is General Clark saying that overall his information is that the attack, the Apache attack, was effective. But that also raises some questions in your mind, having seen your son's Apache helicopter.
Right. That helicopter looked like that he flew. Now, they started talking about how it'll take a hit, but it didn't have any known hits on it, and I was just wondering why it didn't return too. Of course, I know engine malfunctions and things like that, things can go wrong, but it's still not easy, you know, when it's your son.
We had talked about that your wife had sort of when she initially heard the reports of and saw the downed helicopter.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Well, she said about 12 o'clock, she said she had this feeling that, this warm feeling that Ron was there with her. It was just like she was dreaming it or something like that, and she said he had a soft smell, sweet smell about him when he was a baby, and she could detect that at that time, and I guess she felt like everything was, you know, that maybe something had really happened to them. I think it happens to do with mothers. I think maybe they're closer to their children than fathers are because they carry them for so long. But she does have this connection with her children, and it seems that it did pay off. This morning we found out that he was, you know, captured or was missing in action, is what they told us.
Well, clearly your entire family is very close. But when you were informed of this happening, I know your wife told me, she said, I knew it. Mm-hmm. And you were told that he was missing in action.
Right.
Then you saw for the first time pictures of him on television. Mm-hmm. Describe how that made you feel. First hearing that he was a prisoner of war, and then at least seeing him.
Well, at first, I felt like I didn't know whether he was alive or not, and that was a real big question for me. And as I went through the day, I said, well, he's got to be. I just felt like it's probably not him in the helicopter, and I convinced myself that it wasn't his. You know, that he had 1 out of 6 chances for it to be. But then, when the Army came up and told us, you know, the bad news that it was his helicopter, I had this sinking feeling, and I didn't know where. They wouldn't give me any information really, so I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. He was just missing. That's all it was. And then, of course,
you saw
right.
some of the insignias on the side of the helicopter.
Yes,
then you knew it was certainly his helicopter.
I knew that we saw the insignias earlier, and I knew it was one out of his.
There are the pictures of it now.
Right. And I knew that due to the fact that those were his helicopters, that you know, there were six helicopters flying out of his detachment, so I knew.
Because in fact you saw a bat wing on the side.
That's correct. That's right.
That was one indicator that it might have been him.
Yes, ma'am.
You've seen the tape. You've seen these people cheering. Mm-hmm. You've seen how he looks on television. Mm-hmm. How does he appear to you?
He looks good on. You know, when I saw him, he looked like he's been treated well. It looks like it's just another day in the service for him. I mean, he doesn't look like he's had anything noticeably done to him. I mean, he looks good. He looks like I'd expect him to look if he was coming home.
I understand he always wanted to be a pilot.
Always, ever since he was a little boy, he thought about being a pilot and wanted to be a pilot. And he, of course, he got a chance with the Army, so that's where he took the opportunity to be able to go on to flight school and warrant officer school and become a pilot. And it's something he wanted to do. Of course, I've always been kind of fretful for him because I know being a pilot in the service is a dangerous occupation.
You didn't always want him to.
No. I was fine with him being a pilot, but I wasn't fine with us going to war. I mean, you know, it was just a natural thing.
How confident are you he'll come out of this all right?
Well, I feel better than I did. I mean, you know, he's alive, and that's one big thing that was a question in my mind at first. So if the Iraqis will treat him right and we treat their prisoners of war honorably and right, then I think that we got a chance to get them all back home. That's what I hope for, not just him, but all of them, because they all have families just like me.
Indeed, why did you feel it was important to share with everyone how you feel about your son?
Because I know they would feel the same way, and it's not a good situation to be in whenever you lose contact with somebody that is as close to you as your son or your daughter or whatever.
Mr. Young, did you ever talk about the possibility of capture with your son?
I never even thought about the possibility. You know, that's something that you always think that happens to somebody else, not me. You know, and I felt like, well, the odds are, so many helicopters over there, that he'll get through it. But, you know, you just never can tell. And this is one of those times that you can't tell.
You feel he's prepared for it?
Well, he's a tough kid, and he's strong mentally. I think he's prepared for it, yeah. I know he's got a long time and a tough road to hoe, but I believe he's prepared for it.
Well, you certainly have a lot of people pulling for you, Mr. Young.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. And
Yes, ma'am.
as you heard him say, he not only wants his own son back, he also wants the other gentleman back also, who has also been taken prisoner, and everybody else for that matter, Aaron.
Susan, thank you. Susan Candiotti. Let me quickly turn to General Clark. You and I were talking last night about the 5 young Army soldiers who were taken as POWs yesterday, and that they would not have received any particular training to cope with that sort of situation. Would a helicopter pilot, an Apache helicopter pilot have?
He will have received more. He may or may not have gone through a special escape and evasion course, but he will have received more training. He's been through his commissioning school. He knows more about how to conduct himself. A little bit more mature is what you would expect from someone of that rank, and he'll make it.
And just on the subject of rank, for people who don't keep track of such things, a chief warrant officer fits in where in the scheme of things?
Well, warrant officers are technical, and so they're not in the leadership chain like officers.
Like a lieutenant or a captain.
Right. You expect a lieutenant to later become a captain, become a major, and so forth. Warrant officers go from warrant officer 1 to warrant officer 2, 3, 4, and some warrant officer 5s. And so, for example, in the aviation field, they can stay and fly helicopters continuously, whereas an officer who's an aviator would rotate in and out of aviation assignments. These warrant officers are the real experts.
Nice way to put it, thank you. So add tonight into your thoughts the names of these 2 young men, Ronald D. Young Jr., Chief Warrant Officer, family living in the state of Georgia, and also put into your thoughts tonight David Williams, David S. Williams, a Floridian. Both we know are in the custody of the Iraqi government, as are 5 other young Americans in the custody. Their families now have all been notified. As you can see, one of them is a young woman, Shoshana Johnson. We've heard from her family. They represent, in many respects, the true cross-section of the country. They come from the East Coast and the West, from the Midwest. They are African-American and Hispanic and Caucasian. They are very much a cross-section of the diversity of the country, and they ought to be very much in all of our thoughts tonight. Out in Fort Bliss, Texas, there's plenty of heartache there because of the fact it is home of the 507th Maintenance Company. 7 soldiers there are still listed as missing in action, and then there are the 5 that we just showed you who are, we know, prisoners of war. The fifth prisoner's family has now been notified, so now all five have been told formally by the Army that their son or daughter, husband, is a prisoner of war. Ed Lavandera has been at Fort Bliss since this story broke, and he joins us again tonight. Ed.
Hi, Aaron. Well, you mentioned just a short while ago that Shoshana Johnson being the female prisoner of war. Just a few hours ago, we had the chance to speak with her father and sister, and we got into the issue of their concerns about her being a female prisoner of war and how that might or might not affect the situation she's in. They're really not sure exactly what to make of it, but they do say that it is a concern, and they wonder just exactly how she's being treated and whether or not she's being treated any differently from the male prisoners of war. So for them, there is that issue outstanding. As I mentioned, we got to speak with them just a few hours ago. We spent 45 minutes with them talking about it. They explained to us how they found out about this situation. Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock, Claude Johnson, Shoshana's father, said he's flipping on the TV, trying to find some cartoons for his grandchild to watch. Instead, he flips across the Spanish language network, Telemundo, and finds that that network is broadcasting the images from the Iraqi front lines, and that is when he sees the images of his daughters in the custody of Iraqi soldiers. He said it wasn't until 6 hours later that they found out, got the official word from the Army officials here at Fort Bliss that, in fact, his daughter was a prisoner of war.
When she went over there, we knew that obviously this was a little bit more in-depth and more intensive, but I'm sure she didn't think that, I'm sure this is the last thing she thought was going to be on her mind. And she's in maintenance is combat service support. You're not really supposed to be on the front lines at all. You know what I mean? They bring things back to you. You don't think about that stuff when you're a support element.
What happened? Did they miss a checkpoint? They made a wrong turn. Were they supposed to turn? What happened? Where's the breakdown?
You know you're going over there, but you never really think, you know, that this is going to happen. My sisters kind of have always had like a little angel following her around. She always manages to get out of stuff. So this was not something we thought was going to happen to her at all. You know, and in considering the whole situation in which some individuals did die, you know, and the fact that, you know, she was seen on TV, she looks to be staying strong. You know, hopefully her angel's still with her.
I'm hoping that because it was a big televised issue, that they will comply at least to show that they're not as much as the animals that they're portrayed to be.
Shoshana Johnson comes from a family, a military family. Her father, you just heard from, is a 20-year Army veteran. He's also a veteran of the 1991 Gulf War. Her sister that you just heard from as well, Nikki Johnson, is an Army captain based out of Fort Lee, Virginia. So they say that background helps them cope with what's going on. But at some point, you just stop being a military person and you become family, a mother, father, and a sister as well. And that is when the tears start to flow, they say. So as you've seen them very confident and stoic there, they do say that their last couple of days have been extremely emotional for them. And they also say, Aaron, that they have had very little contact with the officials here at Fort Bliss. And by the way, we've been here at Fort Bliss since Sunday. There have been several briefings that have been scheduled and canceled to talk about this. Officials here at this base say that is per the guidance of the Pentagon that has asked them not to comment publicly on any of the details of this case until they get a little bit clearer picture as to what has happened with the 5 POWs there in Iraq.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's not simply the 5 POWs because they know about the 5 POWs. They've seen them. They've seen the tape. In total, that Iraqi State TV showed, they have some sense of their condition. The broader concern, I assume, Ed, at Fort Bliss and at the Pentagon is the 7 others, and there are some pictures. We started talking about this last night, but they want to be sure of where those 7 are, whether they are alive or not, before they say very much. Is that that's not much of a question,
yeah,
but it's...
Well, you're absolutely correct. They are, the status of the other 7 isn't clear. There was 12 soldiers in all, part of the 507th maintenance company that was part of this unit that was taken into Iraqi custody. So yes, that's very much part of the concern and a lot of the reason why they haven't been able to answer any questions here just yet.
Thank you, Ed, very much. Ed Lavandera is down at Fort Bliss. General, 2 questions that were raised. Let me deal with the harder of the 2 first. I think when you talk about a woman being held as prisoner of war, I mean, there's certain sort of obvious and horrible things that run through your mind. This happened during the first Gulf War. There was a woman taken prisoner. She's now an Army colonel, as I recall. Do we have any evidence, one way or another, that women, in fact, were treated any worse by the Iraqis than the men were?
As far as I know, we don't. Okay. But the risk is always there, and, you know, it's a terrifying thing.
And then the other part of this is there was this long national debate about whether women should be in combat, and that was answered in an interesting way. No, they are not involved in direct combat, but as we know now very clearly, we learned this in the first Gulf War and we see it again, women are very much engaged in military operations, including being helicopter pilots.
Anywhere on that battlefield, you're in danger of being in direct combat. And that means you're in danger of being killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. And it really doesn't matter what your military occupational specialty is. You are at risk. And by the way, we have female pilots as well who are flying our strike aircraft in the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force. So it's not just the rear area.
It's funny that while a lot of people would assume this debate has gone on like about a lot of other debates, this one's long settled in the military. The military has in many ways led the way in certain respects in these areas of diversity and the like. They have integrated women in all sorts of ways. And we still sit around and argue about whether it makes sense or not.
We moved past
way
this.
beyond it.
Women are great soldiers, airmen, sailors, Marines, and so forth. Can I just return for a second? I think, as I recall the story from Gulf War, there were some sexual connotations in some of the actions that the female aviator suffered. But she was badly injured.
Yes.
And I think that may have kept it from being worse than it was.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what you worry about. And honestly, I mean, we looked at the tape of Shoshana Johnson yesterday, and she was obviously, as you would be or I would be or any human being on the planet would be, she was scared and nervous, and we just hope that they are decent and treat her decently.
Well, my heart goes out to them.
Yeah, it's all tricky business. We'll take a look at some of the politics of all of this as we go to the White House, other places, and obviously out to the battlefield too. We'll take a short break. First, our coverage continues in just a moment.
What can a pitching machine teach us about financial advisors? Working with one can leave you better prepared. That Wachovia